Welcome to Humanity, the epicenter of ideas surrounding transformative change that will revolutionize the way our world interacts with technology.
For today's show, we're going to be discussing the topic of technology implementer versus technology strategist. I'm Kevin Castle, and welcome to the Humanity Podcast, where we inform and empower the public through powerful dialogue with I2 visionaries. Joining me today is Alfred Miranda, Chief Information Officer at Acreage Holdings. Alfred will discuss the difference between a technology implementer and a technology strategist today. Alfred has over 16 years of technology and leadership experience. He champions Acreage business innovation through technology, includes new go-to-market strategies and state-of-the-art portfolio. Alfred, welcome to the Humanity Podcast.
Oh, Kevin, thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to get the conversation started today because when you and I had talked prior, you brought up this concept of strategist versus implementer. All right. And it's something I don't think people commonly talk about in the industry as we make our investments and strategies and technology. So I wanted just to start there and ask you, tell me a little bit more about how you've arrived at this and kind of where you've seen the dichotomy in our industry, looking at it from those two lenses.
Sure, absolutely. So in my personal experience and in my career, I've always spent a lot of time trying to understand the businesses that I work with. So wherever I've managed to land in my career, whether it's financial services, companies like Herbalife, mortgage industries, or the cannabis industry, I spend a lot of time learning how the business operates before I implement technology because I want to make sure I implement the right solution. I've run across several individuals in my career who prefer just to implement. So what they like to do is they like to get an understanding at a very high level of what their business partners are looking for and work towards finding a solution that's a close enough fit, or is in the process or are in the process of really working towards just implementing products that seem to make sense, but really don't take the time to understand what the true business needs are.
Okay. So do you think it's in line with, responding to a need versus seeking out and advising on what a solution could be before the problem is actually diagnosed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just what you said. It's almost a reaction. You understand the situation at a high level and you find a solution that potentially fits. There's an opportunity when something like that happens where if you can just scratch beneath the surface and really begin to understand, sometimes, sure, you turn over one rock, there's an issue there, you turn over another, there's an issue there. But it's better to get an idea of the whole picture before you implement technology, because not only is it a costly decision, but sometimes when you implement technology, reversing that decision is even harder than the implementation.
Mm-hmm. Amen. And this is one of the topics that you and I discussed as well, which is how do you go from grassroots understanding from a business perspective to where you can lead an IT group and really understand what that impact is at all levels of the organization?
It's interesting. I was giving that some thought since our last conversation as well. I think there's a couple of things here. If you can create a culture within your technology group, I've been fortunate to work with several large entities as well as several small startups that ultimately have become larger entities. And I've always managed to keep a kind of entrepreneurial startup culture within my different groups. And when you do that, it's not only just you that's interested in pursuing a solution, but your culture in your group also has that as well. So you have individuals in your group, and I've had this happen to me several times, that have come to me saying, Alfred, I was working on this project, or someone on my help desk team saying, we were looking into this and we saw this particular challenge that they were having. Maybe there's an opportunity for a better solution there. Because in developing an enterprise-wide solution, it's better to have a holistic approach, better to look at it as an organism, as opposed to having several piecemeal applications or enterprise level applications that potentially don't speak to each other.
Gotcha. All right. So then How do you, I mean, having that entrepreneurial culture, right? That's a hot topic, especially when you want to have organizations that continue to innovate and drive forward, whether that's technology or whether it's just a general product revs. How do you create that environment with your team? Are there specific things that you do? Is there a framework that you roll out to the group to really foster that?
I think what it is, it's really around hiring people and creating a culture where individuals are very inquisitive. So anytime there's an issue or a challenge, or anytime even there's a project, I'm always involved in the very initial aspect of the project. And I ask a lot of questions. My project managers probably think I ask too many questions, but I ask a lot of questions. It's important to understand that even the smallest project could potentially tap into something bigger. So once you begin to ask those questions, you begin a process of thinking in the people around you that they want to be able to anticipate the questions that you're asking. So they begin to incorporate those type of questions in their own routines. And when they do that, they begin to realize, oh, these are really important pieces of the puzzle. Even though this particular project is a small aspect of the portfolio, it could have larger ramifications across the entire IT portfolio. And it may even have opportunities there that they haven't even considered. So it's really important to be able to ask those questions and let the people around you also question you. I tend to hire people who challenge me. I always like the kind of George Washington approach where you can try to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you are and who can push you and make you better. I can't tell you how many times people just walk into my office saying, Alfred, you won't believe what I've discovered. And a half-hour conversation around that could lead in an entirely new solution. So really, it's a combination of several things. It's being inquisitive. It's trying to relay the big picture as much as possible, which I tend to over-communicate to my teams, and to really keep an eye out on technology, because innovation is everywhere. You just need to know how to find it.
Okay. All right. So I guess, when you're describing this entrepreneurship culture that you try to roll out, I mean, is it about, trying to solve problems or trying to think and innovate and be ahead of it? Or is it about understanding business impact with with technology and really feeling that ownership? Or is it all of those different things?
I think it's a little bit of everything. I think, first of all, you have to understand what your constraints are. And generally, when you have an understanding of the business that you're supporting, you understand what the constraints are there. You want to provide a solution that fits within the parameters of what the business is trying to accomplish. You're not trying to go above and beyond. You're not trying to develop from scratch something that already exists. Nobody needs a new version of Word. There's a lot of things that you can look at that can take you into places or down rabbit holes that probably won't support the business. So you have to really understand the business and then use those as your parameters. And then from there, innovation really falls into place. One of a great example is when I was working for a company called Cash Call, and they were a mortgage company and a personal lender. They managed their business through leads. A significant number of leads would come into the business, and really the important aspect of the business was to track those leads, how a lead comes in, how the lead is managed, and ultimately how it's converted. And when it's converted, then how is that lead maintained, and how do you create stickiness with that customer? Well, there weren't a lot of platforms out there that tracked every aspect of that lead. And once we realized that nobody did what we wanted to do, we built a custom platform to not only capture those leads, but to track it all the way to conversion. And anytime it fell apart in the pipeline, you were able to track the cause of why there wasn't a conversion that took place. So operationally, that saved a significant amount of operational overhead, and we were able to pinpoint areas that were bottlenecks in the pipeline for the leads.
Okay. Okay. And so when you guys did that analysis, because I think there's a couple things. If you look out in the market and you find a software package you could implement,
Yep.
and it's portable, you just drop it in, right? That's one side of it, which we don't always get the luxury of having that situation. The other side is file new, build from scratch, and design from grassroots all the way up, right? And then there's
Mhm.
some middle ground, right? If we're using this example with leads, right? One could
Mhm.
probably make a statement that, if you're using the concept of leads and tracking through a process flow, maybe you could take a platform like Salesforce and use that to basically implement on top of. So how would you make the decisions across the latter two, right? The build from scratch, file new versus take a platform and customize where the need is.
Well, I think we both know no solution actually just drops into place. Um, the word turnkey is something that I've never run across in my entire career. So it's not that it makes me resistant to that, it just makes me hesitant.
Sure.
And when it comes to build versus buy, which we could probably just do a show just on that, in my personal decision making, it's something that I make generally with either the COO or the CEO of the company. It's really a conversation about requirements and ultimately the corporate direction.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely have my own perspective for every time I've run across this, and I let them become aware of my biases. But at the end of the day, this is a business decision. I put out the options in front of the entire business, and the business tells me which direction they believe is prudent. Ultimately, if the decision is my own, I still try to communicate up as much as I can. But I think it's really important to understand the pros and cons and be able to communicate those. And sometimes the business isn't in a position where you can create a custom solution. Creating a
Right.
custom solution is very costly and can be very time consuming. But the end results, especially with the technologies and platforms I've delivered, have been extremely positive. So it's really a give and take. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I know that's good. That's good. So I guess when are those when is the build commonly more strategic, right? When does
Mm-hmm.
that give a competitive advantage, and what are the examples when it does or doesn't?
Right. I have two examples that I think we can talk about. So uh, my time at MedMen, it was great. MedMen was a startup. It was an up and coming cannabis company in the United States, ultimately becoming one of the largest, and we were growing incredibly fast. There are a lot of state level and federal regulations that regulate the entire industry. So there was nothing at the time that really aligned with what those requirements were. There's a lot of cannabis technology today. There was a lot then, but none of them were
Mm-hmm.
compliant to the level that was necessary to have an impact on the overall business. So working with the president of the company, he ultimately made the decision that we needed to have a point of sale system that could take into consideration not only the compliance factors at a federal level, but also at a state level, and also create a level of convenience for the customer. At that point, we developed what is now referred to as My MedMen 2.0. It's the first fully compliant point of sale system, and it's used today in all the MedMen stores. And it's a handheld device that operates on an iPhone, and it allows the bud tender to walk around and actually engage the customer. So that didn't exist before. Now there's other companies that do that. If you were to ask me today, would you do that again? I wouldn't do that again today. But at the time, there were really no other options.
Right, right. Okay, I gotcha. And since we're on the topic of your tenure at MedMen, so tell me about your time there. I mean, we jumped right into the concept of strategist versus implementer, but we didn't get a good chance to go through your background. So it'd be good to kind of share with us your background and your experience, and then let's talk about what you did at MedMen, and then talk about what you're doing now, because I think that would give a good overlay and context to the topics we're covering too. Yeah.
My background. So eToys was a startup long time ago in the dot-com days. It's where I started my technology endeavor. Was in charge of, at the time, front-end development there, and also did several other entities as well. Actually, hold on. Let's just reboot from this point.
Okay.
Because that little weird thing. Because I don't know if you guys heard it, but there was a weird noise on my side.
Oh, really? Oh no, I didn't hear anything. Yeah.
Okay. So my career really started at eToys. It was a startup back in the dot-com days. From there, I went to work at PIMCO, Pacific Life, also other financial institutions, AmeriQuest, Cash Call, and several startups. I worked for Move Music, which was a subscription-based music service that was a part of Cricket Communications. I worked at blockchain companies, blockchain startups. Also, starting in cannabis about 4 years ago. So my career is varied across different industries. I'm in cannabis now because I truly believe in the medicinal aspects of cannabis. I think it's a great opportunity to help people, and I'm doing what I can to help various companies pursue expanding their businesses through technology.
Okay. And did you make the move to the cannabis industry from the cause impact perspective?
Yeah, my father about 7 years ago suffered a pretty serious stroke, and his road to recovery was a slow one. It wasn't until I started working with the doctors and we introduced CBDs that we actually saw him improve greatly. Even to this day, I can tell when he doesn't take his CBDs because there's a bit of a change in his speech patterns. But because of that, and because of the significance of that, I truly believe cannabis is something that can change the world, especially on the medicinal front. So I chose to get into cannabis, and luckily I've worked for some great companies like MedMen and Acreage.
Right. So what are you doing at Acreage?
I'm no longer at Acreage. So I am right now advising for some other cannabis companies. So I'm acting as an advisor for several cannabis entities, but I'm still very much in the business.
Okay. And let's go through. What were you doing at Acreage then when you were there?
So at Acreage, I was CIO. I was in charge of their technology portfolio. The main goal that I was trying to achieve during my time at Acreage was implement their ERP platform, their seed to sale platform, which is something that I had done at MedMen. They wanted something that would allow them to collect enough data at every aspect of level of their business, from grow to manufacturing, distribution, retail, inventory, and track the performance of the overall company and make data-based decisions on which direction to take on how they were performing overall.
Gotcha. Okay. I guess, given your involvement, MedMen and Acreage and kind of these larger, let me rephrase this. Given that cannabis is kind of this up and coming big wave new industry that's being birthed right in front of us, right? It's not a common scenario where we get to see an entire industry grow that's highly regulated at the start and requires all of these things and models to be built out, right? So I guess overall, I'd be curious to understand, do you think it's an innovative industry that's growing, right? What is it like to be just a technology leader in that space and trying to figure out what are the solutions there, given that if you look around, they might not all be baked out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like every new industry, right? So you have a lot of technologies that start to appear that, as you put it, aren't fully baked yet. And it's unfortunate because a lot of the challenges that the industry faces have to do with compliance. Cannabis at some point will be legal in the United States, but that doesn't mean that it won't be a regulated product.
Right.
There will always be regulations. There will always be compliance. There will always be state level restrictions around cannabis because of the substance itself. So a lot of different technology platforms have come around. I've dealt with every single company that has some synonym around marijuana as its name. And just like any other industry, you have to do your due diligence, because once you implement, it's virtually impossible to back out. And what's unfortunate is a lot of these companies know that.
Right.
They know that once you're in there, you're stuck, and it's difficult to back out. So I've unfortunately have run across several companies who at this point probably don't like me, because as I've worked with these different cannabis companies, I've had to extract them from the business. It's almost like pulling roots out of a pipe. It's never an easy thing, but long term, it makes the business better. And at this point, it's really important for the industry to get a better understanding of itself. It needs to understand where it is from a data perspective. Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate because it's such a young industry. No one really has cracked that egg yet, and really has implemented a true ERP solution that allow them to make the appropriate decisions in terms of growth, in terms of products, in terms of brands, in terms of ultimately sales, performance, those things. And, it's getting there, and it will get there, but it's just going to take time.
Gotcha. Do you think that there's a correlation between the concept of the implementer versus strategist versus the maturity of an industry?
That's a great question. I really don't. No, I really don't think so. I really think it depends on the individual. Okay. There are entities out there. I'll give you an example. I interviewed with a very large department store chain that's been around for a while. And in having conversations during the process with the various executives within their technology team, they were talking to me a lot about the hackathons that they sponsor. They were talking to me about a lot of the technology and custom development that they do. They talked to me a lot about the offshore team and the size of the offshore team in terms of the development and QA and a lot of the things they were working on. They were talking to me about the size of their budget and how significant it was in comparison to some of the other departments. And when I had that conversation, I thought to myself, I really want to go to this department store and go to the various branches of the department store and have a look for myself and see the technology at play. I went to 6 different locations, and I did not see any technology that outside of the POS system that looked like it helped operationally with the business. So I really found that fascinating, having those conversations and understanding the size of the team and their budget, that for some reason it wasn't translating into the stores. So, of course, I had a couple of conversations, and ultimately I chose not to go down that path. And that department store has faced several challenges. But when I look at their online presence, and I understand that they built that from the ground up, and that wasn't that long ago, I look at it and I think this could have been done in Shopify very easily. Mm. And from an operational perspective and from a cost perspective, it could have been done for significantly less. So for me, that's an example of a very old, very established entity that has been around for a very long time, that is still trying to find its way in technology. And it's unfortunate because I think that there are technologists out there, unfortunately, who take an opportunity like this and really focus on the wrong areas of where to spend their money, as opposed to seeing where the opportunities are to make the business better.
Well, and I think that goes back to your first point, right, about the entrepreneurialism culture, right? Because part of what I was thinking as you were going through that is some of that type of thinking, which you pointed out, is good just to start by forming a line of questioning. Good questions come up with a good way of thinking, which then gets that fostered throughout, which makes perfect sense. But part of what I kept thinking is a good part of being an entrepreneur is having some established business acumen, right? Whether it's on the particular niche that you're building a new business in from an entrepreneur perspective, or it's just general like operations business understanding, right? So I guess, the example that you're giving before in this national retail, they're doing these things like hackathons and they're having these events and they're kind of pitching and selling you on this innovation, but yet you don't see it when it hits the ground when you go into a couple of locations. I guess there's a lot of things that people will do in technology that kind of is checking the boxes, right? But
Absolutely.
how well do you think that we're doing as a collective to really have that established culture of entrepreneurialism or business acumen and understanding and really focus on the outcome and the impact versus just technology for technology's sake?
Yeah, I think always I believe as technologists, we can do a better job of understanding the business. And I think that's what distinguishes the implementer from the innovator.
Mm-hmm.
I myself personally, when I started working at MedMen, I took the time to work in each area of the business to get an understanding of how it functioned. I worked in the grow facility. I worked in manufacturing. I worked in distribution. I worked in the retail stores selling the actual product. And I wanted to introduce technology that was going to help facilitate that at every point. If I was just an implementer, I would have never done that. I would have just asked what everyone was looking for and just found a way to implement that. But in and of itself, that becomes more costly because those technologies don't always speak to each other. And in today's day and age, you need to be able to make data-driven decisions. And the only way to do that is to collect the data as much as you can from the different platforms. That's why, for me, it functions more as an organism than individual technologies just talking to each other.
Makes perfect sense. Yep. I understand. Yep. I guess, so going through the example at MedMen, so what was that like? You tell your executive team, I'm going to work in the grow facility, I'm going to be working retail. I mean, were people scratching their heads watching, or was that part of their culture for people to kind of work grassroots up?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I don't think they were opposed to it. I think they were probably more concerned of how is he going to ride two bicycles at the same time?
Sure.
How is he going to keep things moving forward while he's doing all of this? And there were reassurances that everything was going to be okay, which ultimately I think worked out in a better solution for them. But they were open to it. And as a matter of fact, I think other people were kind of hoping to have the same opportunity. But sometimes in a fast-paced company, it's very difficult to do that. So they responded positively to it. And like I said, ultimately, I think it was a better solution for them, allowing me the opportunity to do that. I think more technologists need to do that with their businesses. When I worked at Herbalife, I worked at the call center itself. Once the call center technology was part of my portfolio, I really wanted to get an understanding of what agents were doing and the challenges that they were facing. So the only way to do that is to actually work at the call center.
I love that. Yeah. And that's one of the things with our local company here at In-N-Out, right? That's what they do, right? They have all levels of their organization work within an In-N-Out location for a period of time every single year, right? And it keeps them tied to what's the impact and the mission, right? No doubt the technology executives are involved there. They get to interact with what the end folks at the point of customer impact and what they're dealing with, right? And it helps to establish the focus on what's important and what's not. Right, so.
Oh yeah, at my team in MedMen, almost everyone on my team had worked at a retail location at some point just to understand what was driving the business. And to me, it's important. I tend to focus on things from a project perspective. So it's important for everyone on my team, whether they're working the help desk, whether they're a developer, whether they're a project manager, to get an understanding of the grassroots of the business.
Gotcha. Okay. I love it. I love it, Alfred. Anything else you'd want to add on the kind of culture side of implementer versus strategist, or anything else, final thoughts before we wrap up?
The only thing I would say is that, in my career, I've run across different kinds of people, and people who could fall into both categories as implementer or innovator, or individuals who are really pursuing the right answers. And I think it's a little bit of a matter of complacency. Sometimes I think when individuals as technologists are in a place for a long period of time, they begin to operate in a very formulaic way. And it's important to shake yourself up every once in a while and ask yourself the question, could I be doing things differently? Could I be doing more? Is there a technology that can better the business? What has changed in the last year from when I learned how the business operated then to what it's doing today? And to really push yourself and to have the people around you push you, because that's the only way you're going to be able to be innovative, is if you find a way to innovate yourself.
I love it, Alfred. I love it. Well, I just want to thank you so much for joining us for today. That's all the time we have. I want to thank you, all the listeners, for tuning in to listen to the insights that Alfred shared with us. And once again, thank you for your insights. Appreciate it. And that's all. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.